Hi, hello, and if you're new to the channel, welcome, and if you've been here before, welcome back. Now, winter on a narrowboat in a marina isn't all about just sort of sitting around the diesel burner or your coal fire or whatever fire or heating you've got on board your boat. There are always tasks to do. And it never ceases to surprise me just how busy I am during the winter months, doing minor repairs, maintenance, just keeping on top of things on board my narrowboat. And in this video, we're going to look at some of those more delightful winter tasks. In winter, you want to stay warm on board your narrowboat, and I've got three sources of heating. I've got a diesel heater, I've got my Webasto heater, and I've got the stove in the boatman's cabin. And all of these need looking after. Now, with all three systems, there are things that you need to do. With the diesel stove in the cabin, I have to light it, it needs fuel as well, and I have to clean it out. Now, admittedly, I don't have to clean out the diesel stove as much as I do the stove in the boatman's cabin, but it does need cleaning. Once a year, I give it a good thorough clean, and then during the winter, I might give it the occasional clean out once every few weeks just to take any ash or soot out of the bottom of the burner pot. The diesel stove in the cabin is easy to look after and it's easy to maintain, and it gets surprisingly hot. Now, the easiest heating source to use and maintain is the Webasto heater. All I have to do to get it going is flick a switch in the bedroom and the heating system fires up. Okay, it needs a little bit of maintenance. Once a year I make sure that the fuel filter feeding fuel into the Webasto is clean, and I check that the water in the radiator system is up to scratch. And every so often I have to have the system professionally serviced. Now, the diesel stove and the Webasto heater both require diesel, so this means that in the middle of winter I may have to do a run to the fuel pump in the marina to get the tank refilled. So I've got to keep an eye on the fuel levels, and I might have the inconvenience of taking the boat out on a wet or slightly windy day to go and get more fuel. The heating system on the boat that takes the most work is the stove in the boatman's cabin. This requires fuel, so I have to lug down kindling and coal. And of course there is the hassle of lighting the stove. But once you get it going, it throws out a surprising amount of heat. It really does seem to warm up the boat and retain its heat overnight, unlike the Webasto heater, which powers radiators, and the diesel stove in the main cabin, which also powers a radiator. Those seem to lose their heat quite rapidly once turned off, but the boatman's stove seems to hold on to the heat for quite some time. There's also the added inconvenience with the boatman's stove that you've got to get rid of all the ash, and it does seem to throw out a lot of dust. A few weeks of using the stove down in the back cabin and you can see the layers of dust building up. However, I do like my boatman's stove because it just seems to throw out a lot of really good heat and keep the back end of the boat very warm. Now, one of the big problems of being on a narrowboat in the winter is condensation. Pretty much everything you do on board, breathing, cooking, even the fires, can throw out water into the inside of the boat, and that all condenses on the cold surfaces such as the windows and the frames around the windows. Now, I try to practice something called lüften on board my boat, which basically means that every morning I throw open all the doors and windows for about 10 minutes and let the air change over. The idea here is that I've heated the boat up a little bit, got it up to 15, 20 degrees or whatever, and then throw open the windows and the doors, let all the warm, damp air out and let in the cold, dry air. However, despite doing all of that, and despite having various dehumidifiers scattered around the boat in cupboards and drawers and in the engine room and the boatman's cabin, I still do get some condensation forming. When I'm away from the boat, I have a dehumidifier set up, and that really does help. But when I'm staying on board, I do wake up to a slightly damp, boat in the morning with condensation on the windows. So I just have to accept the fact that in winter I've got to wipe down the windows in the mornings, keep that water off the wood around the windows. Doesn't take long, just do it once and you're done for pretty much the whole of the day if you've practiced some lüften earlier on. I've put some links through to my videos on condensation in the description below. Besides breathing, another major source of water and hence condensation on a narrowboat is cooking. That is, you burn gas, it releases carbon dioxide and water vapour. And in winter you got to keep on top of your gas supply. Nothing worse than late one evening running out of gas just as you're cooking your hot meal for the day. So there are also runs over to the gas store to get fresh bottles, and those things are surprisingly heavy when empty and incredibly heavy when full. Another consumable to keep an eye on is water, because in my opinion there's nothing worse than waking up on a cold morning and being unable to make a cup of tea because you ran out of water the night before, or trying to cook in the evening and having no water to do that, and you've got to go outside in the rain and the wind and the cold and the dark to fill up your water. Now, one of the advantages of living in a marina is I have a water supply very close to the boat. All I need to do is get the hose out, walk it over, plug it in and open up the tank to refill the water on my narrowboat. Always a good idea to flush the hose out before refilling, just in case there's anything nasty has grown in there in the last few weeks or months. One feature I like on my narrowboat is a water tank overflow. So as soon as I hear water dribbling out the side of the boat, I know it's time to turn off the tap because the tank is full. Another common winter task is keeping up on top of emptying the toilet. Again, there's nothing worse than having a full toilet late at night or early in the morning when the weather's foul that needs emptying. So I tend to keep an eye on my toilet, make sure that I've got spare cassettes for it and make sure that I'm always emptying it when the weather is fine. Now, if your boat is moored up in a marina over winter, there is a danger, particularly if you're hooked up to a shoreline, that you don't run the engine. And this could be bad for the engine. In the summer, I didn't run my engine for 6 or 7 weeks and it caused some problems with the fuel injector system. The stop solenoid gummed up. There's a whole bunch of videos I've got about that on this channel, so check them out if you're interested in what went wrong there. So during the winter months I try to run my engine under load at least once every week or even 2 weeks, just to keep things ticking over, keep the oil moving around, keep the diesel moving around, etc. So what I do is I just fire up the engine and put it under load through either running the generator or putting it into gear while still moored up. And doing this, I find it's sufficient to keep the engine in a sort of happy state, I guess is the way to describe it. I also do regular engine checks on it. I look at the belts, I check the oil, I check the coolant levels and just make sure that the engine is in good order. I must admit I do enjoy running the engine. It makes me think of cruising and I just like the engine noise. A pleasurable winter chore. Now, another thing I keep an eye on during the winter is all the little sort of hidden away spaces on the boat where there might be pipework that could possibly have frozen at some point or could now be leaking. So I keep an eye on the main water supply coming in from the large tank at the front to make sure that there's no problems there. And I also make sure that I turn the water off at the front of the boat when I leave it for any extended period. So just in case a pipe ruptures on board and it deposits the 1,000 litres that I've got in the tank into the interior of the boat. And I also regularly check the hot water tank below the bed, and it's a good job that I do that because I recently found a very, very small leak on one of the pipes, which was fixed by just tightening one of the clips. I also check the bilges that I can access on board. Here I'm just lifting the floor to look at the bilge underneath the boatsman's cabin, and I'll also check under the engine. Here, as you can see, it all looks nice and dry, which is good, but it's good to check. One important place to check is right at the very back of the boat where the prop shaft goes through the hull. This is where the bilge pump is located. And this time when I looked, I found a small amount of water had accumulated. This could be condensation, or it could be coming in around the prop shaft. And if you're wondering what that funny small white thing is at the bottom of the shot, that is a leak sensor that sends an alert to my phone if there is in fact a leak in this area or an accumulation of water. So this is where the water could be coming in via the stern gland and then accumulating in the bottom of the bilge here. The red thing is the bilge pump. So a little bit of water in there, a little bit of grease has dripped down as well, and all of that I cleaned out. Now, as there was a small amount of water in the bilge, I thought I would give the stern gland greaser a twist to squirt some more grease into the stern gland. And as you can see here, it's that sort of coppery brass thing on the right of this shot. It was pretty much screwed down, so I knew it was time to refill the stern gland greaser. A potentially very messy job. So this is the stern gland greaser, and that tap that you can see on the top there should have quite a bit of thread below it, because you screw that down to introduce more grease into the stern gland. So the first thing I needed to do was unscrew the tube. It was just on there hand tight and with a very long thread. And once it was unscrewed, I just need to pack it with some grease. Now, while this is potentially a very messy job, the can of grease does have a feature that makes it surprisingly unmessy. If you look in the can, you can see there's a sort of plastic disc with a hole in the middle. You don't take that out. What you do is you put the stern gland greaser on the top, and whilst pushing down to squirt grease up through that hole in the plastic, you unscrew the stern gland greaser. This forces the grease up into the stern gland greaser, so there's no need to sort of muck around with spatulas or spoons putting it in there. You just push down and keep twisting the handle. So you just keep twisting away and pushing down, and the stern gland greaser will fill up with grease. Surprisingly simple and surprisingly unmessy. Once the stern gland greaser is full, you then just return it to its mounting and screw down the tap at the top until you get resistance, at which point you've introduced grease into your stern gland. One last thing I did on this particular winter's day of boat chores was apply a little bit of oil to the top bearing on my tiller, because you may have noticed in the last video where I went to go and get some fuel, the tiller was squeaking. And a little bit of oil fixed the problem. Well, that's what I get up to on board my narrowboat in winter. I'm cleaning, I'm checking the engine, making sure the engine's still turning over, I'm emptying toilets, filling up with water, getting gas bottles, filling up the grease thing for the stern gland, and general sort of maintenance around the boat. So it's not all cruising, it's not all about being out there on the canal. Now, if you found this video interesting, entertaining or informative, don't forget to give it a big like, a big thumbs up, and if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel, because it all helps. On the screen now you'll see a QR code, and if you scan that QR code, that will take you through to a newsletter about the Grey Wagtail. It's a free newsletter. You can either scan the QR code or click the link in the description below. Anyway, thanks for watching for this long. Bye for now.